brothers in the Dharma, what will you say to those whose lives spring up between custom and circumstance, as weeds between wet stones, whose lives corruptly flower, warped from the beautiful, refuse and sediment their means of sustenance? What will you say to them? That woman, night after night, must sell her body for bread. This boy, with the well-oiled hair and the innocence dead in his face, must lubricate the obscene bodies of gross old men, and both must be merry all day, for thinking would make them mad. What will you say to them? Those dull-eyed men must tend machines till they become machines, or till they are cogs in the giant wheel of industry, producing the clothes that they cannot wear, and the cellophaned luxury goods they can never hope to buy. What will you say to them? Or these dim shadows which through the pale gold tropic dawn from the outcast village flit, balancing on their heads baskets to bear away garbage and excrement, hugging the wall for fear of the scorn of their fellow men? What will you say to them? And wasted lives that litter the streets of modern cities, souls like butt ends tossed in the gutter and trampled on, human refuse dumped at the crossroads, where civilization and civilization meet to breed the unbeautiful. What will you say to them? I shall say nothing, but only fold in compassion's arms their frailty till it becomes strong with my strength, their limbs bright with my beauty, their souls with my wisdom numinous, or till I have become like them, a seed between wet stones of custom and circumstance. So that's a poem written by Sangharakshita in 1953 in Kalimpong. It's called The Bodhisattva's Reply. So the questions throughout the poem are to the Bodhisattva. And Sangharakshita wrote this poem in response to hearing the life story of a young Dalit man, a downtrodden man. In those days they weren't called Dalits, so they were regarded as untouchables. But he was listening to this young man's life, and he was very deeply moved by that life, and out came this poem. And of course he was also writing about his own experiences of seeing people suffering in the cities, seeing the sufferings of untouchability, seeing all those things, seeing the meaningless lives that many people lived of any walk, any part of society. And you can hear in the poem this sort of, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? How are you going to respond? I mean, Sangharakshita was very moved by the Bodhisattva ideal, this ideal of gaining enlightenment for all beings. His early poetry is full of it. His early writings is full of it. And here is the encounter with real suffering, with very strong suffering. What will you say to them? Who is Sangharakshita asking that question of? Is it himself? Is it the Bodhisattva? Is it the Dharma? And of course, not long after writing this poem, he had his first meetings with Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, the great leader, or the first law minister of the government in India, who framed the Indian constitution, who outlawed untouchability, this extraordinary man who rose up from that so-called untouchable community, and who eventually converted to Buddhism and led hundreds of thousands of men and women into the Dharma, thus reviving Buddhism in India after centuries of it being absent, Buddhism as a living tradition. I first read this poem in India, actually, in around 1978-79. And I was in India because of Sangharakshita. I was in India because of Bhante. Lokamitra, a very close friend of mine, an order member who still lives in India, had gone to India on pilgrimage, gone to train with Mr. Iyengar doing yoga. Surita was on that first trip as looking after Lokamitra. But Lokamitra went there, and Sangharakshita said, well, why don't you make connection with some of my old Buddhist friends in Nagpur, in Pune, and in other places? And Lokamitra did that, and they immediately asked him to give Dharma talks, to lead retreats, to take classes. And they said, nothing's happened since Bhante left. Nothing's happened since Sangharakshita left. There's been no Dharma. Things have just got very politicized in our community. Will you come? Will you come and start a centre? It's very important to remember this, that our movement sort of returned to India, or went to India, out of an invitation from Indian Buddhists, particularly an order member named Dharmaloka, Dharmacharini, Mrs. Maheshka, one of Bhante's oldest disciples. She insisted that Lokamitra come and start doing things. So Lokamitra thought about it, talked with Bhante about it, and he wanted and decided to go to India, which was a huge step. And there were a few people interested. So I was one of those. I was, 20, working at the old fire station, converting the old fire station in Bethnal Green into a Buddhist centre, and I wanted to go. So I tagged along with Lokamitra. And I went there because I did want to work for the Dharma in India. I was inspired by Sangharakshita, inspired by Lokamitra, inspired to the extent that I knew about him by Dr. Ambedkar and the great movement of conversion. I was inspired by the Bodhisattva ideal, the compassionate hero, the one who gives himself fully, completely to liberate others, the one who gives his entire being, and you can hear that in the poem, making people strong with his compassion, his strength, his wisdom, his beauty. All is given. He's there with the people. So I was very inspired by that, and I remember that when I read that poem in India, because I got sent a copy of Bhante's poems that had just come out, an early version of the complete poems, and it was just so thrilling to read that poem and poems like it in India, and to really feel that, this is the vision, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And my inspiration to pursue the Bodhisattva ideal went back to my earliest days, my earliest involvement. I must say, I just want to qualify this inspiration, because I can't say that I was a compassionate person or anything like that, or had a kind of, I was moved by the sufferings of the world. When I was a teenager, when I was first discovering the Bodhisattva ideal, that wasn't the case, quite definitely. But there were certain things that went on that were related to the Bodhisattva ideal. My first contact with the Dharma in Brighton, before we even had a centre, some of you have heard this, I know already, first contact was a long Metabhavana meditation followed by a sevenfold puja. And by the end of the puja, I knew that I would devote my life to Buddhism. I was 17 at the time. I knew definitively that was going to be my life from now on. It was very clear. And of course, the puja, although I did not know it at that time, the puja is a practice to develop the bodhicitta, to open up to what motivates the bodhisattva, this urge to supreme enlightenment. And I think one of the reasons why I responded so strongly to the puja was related to earlier experiences that I'd had in my younger teenage years. Very hard to describe these experiences, but very important, sort of defining experiences, sort of feelings of, if that's the right word, of feeling that a kind of wordless prayer, it's the only way I can describe it, or aspiration, sort of pouring out of my heart, going up and up and up, and there being a response, some kind of response from somewhere. I mean, when it first happened, I thought I was in contact with God, And years later I sort of realised, well, no, that wasn't really, that was the only framework I had. But this sort of sense of an aspiration ascending and a kind of blessing or grace descending, and that being characterised by love, by compassion. So of course, when I found the puja and also operating in, knew very early on that Buddhism was non-theistic, it wasn't to do with a creator God, that it was something else going on, was absolutely thrilling. And then I heard, not long after that, Sangharakshita's lecture, The Awakening of the Bodhi Heart. I would have heard it probably on a reel-to-reel tape. It tells you how long ago it was. And that was, out there technology in those days. Cassettes were just coming in. And I remember that lecture very well. Again, a defining lecture where he talks about what this bodhicitta is. What this bodhicitta is. It's very hard to... Well, he says that, at one point he says, bodhicitta is not a good word for bodhicitta. Nothing can translate it, nothing can describe it, because you're talking about something, he follows Nagarjuna, that the bodhicitta is not to be included in the 5 skandhas, that is, in any element, any part of conditioned existence. It's, as it were, the arising of an altogether different dimension in the human heart, a dimension which is characterized by wisdom, the fullness of wisdom, seeing things as they are, and great compassion, and arising as a kind of motive, a force that erupts in you to work for the benefit of others, and that the bodhicitta is nobody's personal possession. He gives an image, a Mahayana image of innumerable bowls of water in which the moon is reflected, innumerable bodies of water, and the moon is reflected. And these sort of phrases, there's one bodhicitta and it manifests in different individuals, but it's alive, it's dynamic, it's transformative. This was very, very important for me, this lecture. It made complete sense. And although I wasn't a compassionate person by any means, and I still wonder about that, the idea that you could have a spiritual life that was just for yourself always seemed ridiculous. It must be something that is for everybody and that you share with everybody. In principle, it can be everybody's, and your life should be devoted to sharing it with everybody. If it's not yours anyway, if it's coming from another dimension that's motivating you and transforming you, how can it be yours? You want that to be shared. There's an abundance to this. So that all made complete sense. I must just say, it made complete sense in the midst of tremendous immaturity. I can't tell you how immature I was, as one is when one's a teenager and early 20s. And of course, you don't know how immature you are and how foolish you are. You don't know at the time that you're a bala, a fool, or as Bhante more kindly translates it, spiritually immature. And you are immature indeed when you don't know that you're immature, as the Buddha says. So, in the midst of all that stuff, teenage years, early 20s, there's something else going on, trying to sort of come through. I got ordained when I was 19 on a weekend retreat, different ordination process in those days. Mind you, it was at the hands of Sangharakshita, so, it was a proper ordination process. And it was very strong, very transformative, a real sort of sense of transmission, a real sense of energy being activated. Perhaps even the energy of the bodhicitta. To this day, I don't know what that energy was. I don't know how you'd characterize it. And I thought, oh, well, if I just do the visualization practice that Bhante gave me at my ordination, in a couple of years, surely, easily, the bodhicitta will arise, and I'll just be sailing along by this force of wisdom and compassion, dispensing spiritual goodies to all and sundry with very little effort on my part. very little responsibility on my part. Not so easy. Not so easy, as I think D.H. Lawrence says in one of his poems. You know, the gods don't give things so easily as this. And I must say, my Dharma life, very soon after, or my life after this, involved many humiliations, especially in India, and many learnings and many burnings. And that continues. It's getting perhaps a little bit better. So accepting the embrace of the bodhicitta, of the bodhisattva, of the force of wisdom and compassion is no easy thing. Is it an embrace, or is it more like a wrestling match? There's that wonderful poem by Rilke called The Man Watching. This is a bit of it, this is Robert Bly's translation of Rilke. What we choose to fight is so tiny. What fights with us is so great. If only we would let ourselves be dominated as things do by some immense storm, we would become strong too and not need names. When we win, it's with small things, and the triumph itself makes us small. What is extraordinary and eternal does not want to be bent by us. I mean, the angel who appeared to the wrestlers of the Old Testament when the wrestlers' sinews grew long like metal strings. He felt them under his fingers like chords of deep music. Whoever was beaten by this angel, who often simply declined the fight, went away proud and strengthened and great from that harsh hand that kneaded him as if to change his shape. Winning does not tempt that man. That is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. Winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. Wonderful words there. This language of embracing and of being embraced is not untraditional. It's not just, from the poetry of Sangharakshita, the Bodhisattva's embrace, the Bodhisattva's reply. It's not untraditional language at all. We have this word in Sanskrit, parigraha. Parigraha. Parigraha, it can be translated in a number of ways. It can be translated of grasping, gathering, grasping in a sort of positive sense, getting hold of, gathering, encompassing, embracing. So I want to talk a bit about the bodhicitta parigraha, embracing the bodhicitta, or being embraced by the bodhicitta. It comes up a lot, this language, in Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara. In many, many places he uses this word parigraha, embracing and gathering, encompassing, getting hold of. And sometimes it's not clear what's getting hold of what. After a vision, you've had that vision, you've had that intuition, no matter how slight, to lead this life, this Buddhist life. That's presumably why you're here. On some level or other, you've had a kind of intuition, a sense, a thought that life can be lived differently. You don't want to go on the same old tracks. You want to do it differently. You want to open up to something else. You want to find something else. And you have to do that yourself. So you've got a little opening, something has opened up for you. Well, and vision, intuition, even sort of deep thought, it's elusive. You get that glimpse where it's so clear. And I think of those moments when I was younger. It was so clear in those moments. Outside of those moments where, in a sense, you could say those timeless moments, those moments where you glimpse eternity, outside of them, you lose them, inevitably, as you come back to time, as you come back to space, as you come back to your conditioning, as you come back to your habits. Was that a dream? What was that? what happened? Was it real? Was it a fancy? You can even doubt it. So you've got to get a hold of it. In the Bodhicharyavatara, there's a verse very early on where Shantideva is praising the bodhicitta and saying it has all these qualities. And there's one verse that I keep coming back to. He's likening the bodhicitta to the quicksilver elixir of the alchemist, and therefore liking the embrace of the bodhisattva to undergoing alchemy. Taking this base image of the human form, the bodhicitta transmutes it into the priceless image of the Buddha jewel. Grasp tightly, parigraha, grasp tightly this highly potent quicksilver elixir known as the bodhicitta, which must be thoroughly worked into your being, into your consciousness, into your life, to effect the transformation. So how do we take hold? And how do we allow the bodhicitta to take a hold of us? How do we work this bodhicitta into our consciousness? There's so much one could say. We could talk about all the areas of general Buddhist practice. Metabhavna, mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness in daily life, performing the sevenfold puja regularly, practicing Buddhist ethics, spiritual friendship, meeting spiritual friends, being involved in the Sangha, helping the Sangha through generosity, through service, plunging in, making some sort of vow or commitment to live this life, or moving in slowly, gradually, finding your way. These are all ways to work that bodhicitta into our consciousness, that mind of wisdom and compassion. And you have to find your own way. You have to find your own way into it. This is tremendously important. This is one of the sort of beauties of Buddhist practice. One can make general points, but you are individually responsible for how you live it. This is so, so important. So I can't talk about everything, but I just want to draw your attention to a few things. The first thing I want to talk about is embracing the Bodhisattva's mindfulness. Embracing the Bodhisattva's mindfulness. I want to talk about the Bodhisattva's mindfulness. And here I've got in mind a wonderful passage from Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, where he talks about a Bodhisattva's mindfulness. It's a long chapter, a very important chapter. Just some passages, so I find particularly rich. Regard the body as a ship, on account of the way it comes and goes. At your own command, set the body on course to fulfill the needs of beings. So the Bodhisattva's mindfulness, first of all, isn't just in relation to himself, but it's to fulfill the needs of beings. One's own nature mastered in this way, one should always have a smiling face. He doesn't mean by that going around grinning and not meaning it. He means being in touch with metta, being in touch with friendliness. So the smile is natural. One should always have a smiling face. One should give up frowning and grimacing. Be the first to speak. A friend to the universe. I love that. Be the first to speak, to greet and welcome. I learned so much of that in India. Being the first to speak. In India, when I lived there with my Buddhist friends, the hospitality, and I was living with very poor people, immersed in that Buddhist community, the sense of putting people at their ease, being the first to speak. I learnt so much through just being with people like this. So be the first to speak, a friend to the universe. One should speak confident, measured words, clear in meaning, delighting the mind, pleasing to the ear, soft and slow, and stemming from love. Wow, that's so attractive, isn't it? Developing a confidence so that you can communicate really clearly to people. You delight people. Bodhisattva doesn't go around telling people off. And even if he does have to criticize on occasion to people to help them, it's He's going to delight their minds. He's going to please them. And the whole sound of his voice will be so pleasant. And everybody will know this is coming from love. One should always look at people directly. So a bodhisattva clearly is somebody very honest, very open. One should always look at people directly, as if drinking them in with the eye, with the attitude, depending on them alone, I will attain Buddhahood. So the bodhisattva has this tremendous awareness of gratitude for others, because all other people, and sometimes I say especially people who are difficult, who are giving you a difficult time, especially them, they're teaching you how to develop love. You're extending the range of love through the people that you're meeting, you're being in touch with. And that is enabling you to attain Buddhahood. One should be able and energetic, at all times acting on one's own initiative. In all actions, one should not leave any work to another. So you're quick to help. You don't boss people around and tell them what to do. It's not what a bodhisattva does. The bodhisattva gets stuck in to help people. One should do nothing other than what is either directly or indirectly of benefit to living beings. And for the benefit of living beings alone, one should dedicate everything to enlightenment. So that's the constant attitude of the bodhisattva. But you notice that emphasis on friendship, on being friendly in a kind of ordinary human way. That's the basis of the bodhisattva path. You can have all these fancy ideas of the bodhicitta, and I had lots of fancy ideas about the bodhicitta with its metaphysics and so on. But when it comes down to it, it's about learning how to be a good friend in a very, very ordinary, straightforward way, and extending that range of friendship. Interestingly, towards the end of his section on mindfulness, Shantideva says, never, even at the cost of one's life, should one forsake a spiritual friend who upholds the bodhisattva's vow and who is skilled in the meaning of the way to enlightenment of all beings. So as if to say, well, you also need to be mindful of what you need. You need to be mindful of putting yourself in contact with spiritual friends so that you can be a spiritual friend to others. So that's embracing the bodhisattva's mindfulness. The second reflection for you is I've called it embracing the bodhisattva's attuned heart. Bit of a mouthful. In the bodhisattva tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on imaginative identification with others. This is brought out in Sangharakshita's discussion of our first precept. If you look in the 10 pillars of Buddhism, he basically explains abstaining from harming living beings in bodhisattva terms. And that what we should be doing with that precept is learning to imaginatively identify with others. That we do have this wonderful quality of consciousness as human beings, whereby we can put ourselves in the place of another. We can imagine how they feel, how they are. This is strongly emphasized in the Bodhisattva tradition. And in one text from a Sangha, there's a whole ethics. It's called the ethics of attuning the heart. The Chittanu Vartana Shila, or if you like, the activity of attuning the heart to everybody you meet. A Sangha calls this harmonizing with the aspirations of sentient beings. Harmonizing with the aspirations of sentient beings. And this is explained. They try to really unpack it. First, it says, firstly, the Bodhisattva knows the dispositions, the nature, and the elements of sentient beings. Knowing those dispositions, nature, and elements, he lives together with sentient beings as one should live with them. So Asanga is saying that this attuning yourself to others enables you to really be with others in spiritual community. That's what enables spiritual community to happen. He acts towards sentient beings as one should act towards them. And then there's a bit of an explanation of, well, What does it mean to harmonize with the dispositions of others? And this is unpacked as the Bodhisattva, as it were, tunes in to the present state of the person they're with. This is what you have to do, don't you, in communication. It's no use you carrying on in the same old way when you can see that the other person is in a bit of a state. Maybe they're unhappy, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're inspired, maybe they're joyful, maybe there's not a lot going on, maybe they're full of love, maybe they're full of hatred. You need to know that. You need to attune to that. You need to make sense of that before you know how to communicate with them. That's something that you need to learn how to tune yourself up. It's very interesting being with Sangharakshita in India, especially. I've been with Sangharakshita in so many situations, but I noticed it especially in India, how attuned he was to the people. He could sense a huge, the vibe, if you like, of, meetings of thousands of people. And the Dharma talk that he'd give would be really attuned to that, to their states, but also to their nature. And their nature is explained as a person's inclination, in the sense of what particular path that they will take. It's a kind of resonance, if you like, with their aspiration and potential. So a bodhisattva isn't just aware of somebody's state, they're aware of their potential and will attune the communication accordingly. And the teaching will therefore be highly appropriate to them. It goes further, then there's an attuning to what's known as the elements. And this is sort of explained as, what their conditioning is, what they've brought to the situation from even their previous lives. So you're deeply sympathetic to where they come from, where they're going, and what they're like now, how they are now. So that you can see what the Mahayana are trying to do. They're trying to analyze, trying to model, if you like, what happens in empathy. They're trying to describe something that we do as human beings, probably unconsciously, but they're taking hold of that and saying, well, this is what a bodhisattva does. And of course, eventually that becomes perfectly natural in a bodhisattva. You don't have to learn it. It just all comes out of your loving awareness of others. So you're highly attuned to other people. I mean, it was said of the Buddha that the Buddha's communication, if the Buddha was giving a Dharma talk, everybody would think he was talking to them personally, even though he was talking to the whole room. And they said, this is a special quality of the Buddha. But it's all coming out of this different mind, this bodhisattva's mind, the embrace of the bodhisattva's mind. So this leads me to embracing the bodhisattva's skillful means. So skillful means, upaya kaushalya, is a very important notion in the Mahayana, in the bodhisattva path. We hear a lot about compassion, but actually upaya kaushalya is more important. Upaya kaushalya, skillful means, if you like, wisdom and compassion conjoined, tuned up to the particular needs of the world you're in and the individuals you're in relationship to. Skillful means can be misunderstood. I've heard people rationalise all sorts of unskillful behaviour on the grounds, well, it was skillful means. I was tuning into her. You can imagine the situation. She needed me. He needed me, skillful means. But it's the sort of embodiment of skillful means is found in a sutra, Mahayana sutra, that Sangharakshita introduced us to in the 1980s, called the Vimalakirti Nidesha, the teaching of Vimalakirti. Vimalakirti is this character who lives in the great city of Vaishali. Apparently he lives like a layman, but that's just a skillful means. And he manifests sickness out of his skillful means, because when a great man becomes sick in India, everybody comes. everybody wants to come and see them, but very few people want to go. The Buddha's great Bodhisattva disciples, his great Arahant disciples, they're really reluctant to go and console Vimalakirti because he is sort of ferocious in his communication, and he's often shown the limitations of their practice. But anyway, people do go. But this is the description, or part of the description, of what he was like. In order to develop living beings with his skillful means, Vimalakirti lived in the great city of Vaishali. His wealth was inexhaustible for the purpose of sustaining the poor and the helpless. He observed a pure morality in order to protect the immoral. He maintained patience and self-control in order to reconcile beings who were angry, cruel, violent, and brutal. He blazed with energy in order to inspire people who were lazy. He maintained concentration, mindfulness, and meditation in order to sustain the mentally troubled. He attained decisive wisdom in order to sustain the foolish. So that's the first sort of description of him. He inspires people through his exemplary practice. The Bodhisattva's skillful means is first of all exemplifying the life. People need the Bodhisattva to be something for them. And the Bodhisattva is that person for them. This is really an inspiring way of thinking about spiritual practice. Of course, Vimalakirti has attained these things for, well, the sheer love of the Dharma. Generosity, ethics, patience, meditation, and wisdom. These are energy, these are the 6 paramitas. But I think for us, I think we can think in a different way. We can think, we can gain inspiration, if you like, to practice, to develop skillful means by being the person that others need. Sometimes people don't like this way of talking, but actually this is real Bodhisattva stuff. There's that wonderful story of Dada Rinpoche, whose relics we have in the stupa out there, the teacher who gave Bhante the Bodhisattva vows, when he was 8 years old, being installed as the incarnation of a great Bodhisattva. You know, this great procession of monks, he's going to be enthroned in, the great monastery. And at 8 years old, he realised, these people think I'm a Bodhisattva, but I'm not a Bodhisattva. But they want me to be a Bodhisattva. So I will make every effort to be a Bodhisattva for them. 8 years old. Look at that motivation for practice. And that really did inspire him to become a great Bodhisattva. I remember this in India as well, that I remember leading a meditation retreat, and they wanted to do meditation interviews, my Indian friends, order members and mitras, and they'd heard about meditation reviews, and I really didn't want to do these reviews because at that time my meditation was so appalling. What on earth? There's no way on earth I can do meditation interviews, but they said, no, you've got to do it. You have to, Padmavajra. We need you to do this. So I said, okay, come in and have these little conversations, and people would tell me about their meditations, and very often it was I could recognise first dhyana, second dhyana, third dhyana, insights, and I'm thinking about my own spiritual practice, my own meditation practice, which was, well, let's not go there about how it was at the time. But I found I could give them advice. Amazingly, this is the magic of the Dharma. I was able to tell them things to deepen their practice, which my friends were extremely grateful for. And they would, in India, people are very respectful and reverential, and they would bow to me and so on. I thought, this is weird. This is weird. I felt very, very uncomfortable. And then I realised, no, you mustn't reject this response that people are giving you, but you need to realise that the reason why this is happening is because you have the blessing of your teacher. You've had the great good fortune of studying with Sangharakshita, of learning with Sangharakshita, and what you're passing on is his understanding and wisdom. That's what's really happening here. And you probably notice yourself, if you're involved in classes, you know, even though you might have been involved very long, you're on the team for, you know, the beginners class or the regulars class or the course, that people relate to you as somebody with experience. You know, they go to you and they look to you for help. And you don't let that go to your head. You respond, and you respond in such a way that enables you to develop and deepen your own spiritual practice. So we need to embrace this. We need to embrace the fact that we can be an example of living the life, not setting ourselves up as a teacher. Just being ourselves, practicing the Dharma, can be of enormous benefit to other people, even at our level, as it were. Vimalakirti's response to people is completely unbiased. The description of him goes on. In order to be in harmony with people, he associated with elders, with those of middle age, and with the young. It always spoke in harmony with the Dharma. So it's really important to understand that, you know, the Bodhisattva wants to connect with people of all ages, and he will always be in harmony with the Dharma. He won't kind of pretend to be somebody he isn't. He'll always be sitting and standing in the Dharma, but able to connect with people, whatever their age, whatever their experience. It goes on. He engaged, this is Vimalakirti, in all sorts of businesses, yet had no interest in profit or possessions. To train living beings, he would appear at crossroads and on street corners. I like that, appearing at crossroads and street corners. Go to your street corners in your cities and your crossroads and appear and communicate the Dharma to people. And to protect living beings, he participated in government. He participated in government. Imagine Vimalakirti running the government or part of the government. I mean, that would be a shock for Rishi Sunak and everybody else, I should think. To develop children, he visited all the schools. I was talking to a friend of mine, an order member, who meditates on the 11-headed and 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, and he's a headmaster of a primary school in the northeast with 500 pupils. And he's absolutely devoted to that work. And, you know, our schools, as so those of you as teachers knows, often have to engage with so many different problems. It's not, you know, it's not just educating people in the national curriculum, children in the national curriculum. I mean, you know, what he describes is like being a social worker, a therapist, a counsellor, everything. Even having to be a bit political in relation to, you know, different people around. He sees it all as the expression of the 11-headed, 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. Very inspiring to hear the way he talks. To demonstrate the evils of desire, he even, this is Vimalakirti now, not the order member, to demonstrate the evils of desire, he even entered the brothels. To establish drunkards in correct mindfulness, he entered all the cabarets. He was honoured as the businessman among businessmen because he demonstrated the priority of the Dharma. He was honoured as the landlord among landlords because he renounced the aggressiveness of ownership. He was honoured as the warrior among warriors because he cultivated endurance, determination and fortitude. He was honoured as the aristocrat among aristocrats because he suppressed pride, vanity and arrogance. He was honoured as the official among officials because he regulated the functions of government according to the Dharma. He was honoured as the prince of princes because he reversed their attachment to royal pleasures and sovereign power. Amazing. You know, this sort of description of this figure, and it's clear in a way that Vimalakirti is not one person. He's a spiritual community, if you like. This is our aspiration as a spiritual community. We've heard that Sangharakshita sees, had a sort of intuition that the order is a manifestation of the 11-headed and 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. Every single order member, even every single person in the movement, is a manifestation of that great compassion but operating in the world in their particular way, with their particular skillful means. This is so, so important that we see our activity, whether we're teachers, doctors, artists, musicians, businessmen, whatever it is that you do, or if you like, a non-specific human being, social workers, all the different kinds of people you could imagine. What we want is for us to be unified in the embrace of the bodhicitta, reaching out to bring the Dharma into those situations. Not about converting people or anything like that, but introducing people to, even though they don't necessarily know it, to the benign influence of the Dharma. I mean, above all else, helping people to really grow and develop as human beings. What we're really concerned with as a spiritual community is human flourishing, deep human flourishing from the deepest part of them. Of course, if people do commit themselves to the Dharma, so much the better. And we need to have a sense of time with this. It's not just in space now and up against all the sort of problems of the world. We also need to have a sense of our activity in time and what goes beyond our time now into the future. Again, a very important experience I had in India was, for a period in India, I took the yellow robe. I was an anagarika, I was celibate, and I was doing a lot of retreats at our retreat centre in Bhaja of different kinds. And Bhaja has these old stupas, or these old caves, these old cave monasteries with lots of rock stupas all around them. And we'd often go up to the caves to meditate. Very, very old indeed. You know, that supported a spiritual community back in the day. And you could see from the cave our little retreat centre in the valley, down below, across the fields. And I remember one time standing, looking across our retreat centre and aware of these stupas all around me. And I was wondering, well, who were the stupas memorialising? You know, whose relics did they contain, if they had any relics, or who? Certainly they were memorialising, because there were lots of them. And I was wondering what great teachers, you know, had visited Maharashtra, what great Indian masters and so on. And I thought, well, maybe not. Maybe they were just people like me, just very ordinary people, kind of forgotten. You know, I'll be forgotten, but part of this great stream of Dharma, through the ages, down the ages, that's emerging again here. That was still in the 20th century, here, now. And that continuity. And I felt very, very moved, and a kind of, you know, a very strong aspiration developed to, well, to continue this stream and to be part of this stream and be part of handing on this stream to future generations long, long after I and others have been forgotten. So finally, I want to talk I don't quite know how to call this section. It is to do with being embraced, in this sense, being enclosed. I wanted to call this section, "Let us go into the house of the Lord." That old spiritual, I think. But I won't. Let's call it "Returning to the House of the Dharma." And this is related to the Vimalakirti Nirdesha as well, because Vimalakirti lives in a house, although it's a very strange house that keeps changing its dimensions and it disappears. And there's a goddess who lives in that house. She's not sort of depicted, she's just there. There's the Devi, she's just called the Devi, the goddess, who lives in Vimalakirti's house. Vimalakirti has a Devi in his house. And the goddess sort of intervenes at a certain moment in some of the discussions. And she just says, suddenly, sort of apropos of nothing really, in the middle of a conversation, she talks about the house that Vimalakirti resides in. She says, "I have been in this house for 12 years, and I have heard no discourses concerning the disciples and solitary sages but have heard only those concerning the great love, the great compassion, and the inconceivable qualities of the Buddha. Reverend Shariputra, 8 strange and wonderful things manifest themselves constantly in this house. What are these 8? A light of golden hue shines here constantly, so bright that it is hard to distinguish day and night, and neither the moon nor the sun shines here distinctly. That is the first wonder of this house. Furthermore, Reverend Shariputra, whoever enters this house, human or non-human, is no longer troubled by their passions from the moment they are within. This is the second strange and wonderful thing. Furthermore, this house is never forsaken by Shakra, Brahma, the Lokapalas, and the Bodhisattvas from all the other Buddha fields. That is the third strange and wonderful thing. Furthermore, Reverend Shariputra, this house is never empty of the sounds of the Dharma, the discourse on the 6 perfections, and the discourses of the irreversible wheel of the Dharma. That is the fourth strange and wonderful thing. Furthermore, Reverend Shariputra, in this house, one always hears the drums, songs, and music of gods and humans. From this music constantly resounds the sound of the infinite Dharma of the Buddha. That is the fifth strange and wonderful thing. Furthermore, in this house, there are always the 4 inexhaustible treasures, replete with all kinds of jewels, which never decrease, although all the poor and wretched may partake to their satisfaction. That's the 6th strange and wonderful thing. Furthermore, at the wish of this good man, to this house come the innumerable Tathagatas of the 10 directions, such as the Tathagatas Shakyamuni, Amitabha, Akshobhya, and so on. And when they come, they teach the door of the Dharma called the secrets of the Tathagatas, and then depart. That is the 7th strange and wonderful thing. And finally, all the splendors of the abodes of the gods and all the splendors of the fields of the Buddhas shine forth in this house. This is the 8th strange and wonderful thing. So why have I read this? Why do I think that's important? I'm not going to give a detailed commentary on it because time's going on. It's a house. It's a home. It's a place you go to enrich yourself with the Dharma. You know, where as soon as you go in, your afflictions, your kleshas, your suffering vanishes, and where you hear the teachings, where the Tathagatas come, where the Buddhas come to teach you, which is full of riches, where you're enriched. We need such houses. This is, of course, what our centres are. You know, it's not enough if you're on this Bodhisattva path to be really friendly with people and to help them. You've got to take them somewhere. You've got to bring them into a place. You've got to build a room, a centre. You've got to maintain a room, a centre, a place in which they can be enriched in this way. Why? Because, well, the world is very, very demanding. We need these protected spaces, if you like, where we can really feel the embrace of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva's heart, where that's concentrated. And of course, we then have to go out into the world, but we take it with us. So it's very, very important to build the house of the Dharma. Perhaps in your own homes, you've got a special place where you meditate, a special room where you meditate even, but certainly a corner, which is a special place that you go to with your shrine. That's your house of the Dharma. You go regularly to your centre. You go regularly to retreat centres like Padmaloka. So yes, we need to go into the houses of the Dharma. There need to be many houses of the Dharma to respond to the needs of the many beings throughout the world. So it's really, really important that we concentrate on this. This is what Bodhisattvas do. They create environments in which people can be embraced by the Bodhicitta, by the Bodhisattvas, where the teachings are flourishing, where there is a kind of glimpse of eternity, that light that shines, that eclipses the sun and the moon, that shines even in the midst of darkness. We need to create places out of our own hearts that are imbued with this. But we also need to create that home, that house within ourselves. We need to make our hearts like that. We need to create a kind of interior home of the Dharma, house of the Dharma. Was it St. Teresa of Avila talked about the interior castle? I think, so you even get that in Christian mysticism. The interior house, which we can go to, that we take with us in the midst of the world, which we can draw from, and from that embrace, yes, embrace whoever we meet, so that they're enriched, they're benefited, and perhaps, who knows, they'll commit themselves to being embraced by the Bodhisattva. Thank you.